The day they handed my life to someone else like it was a used toy was the day I understood what true cold felt like. I remember the sting of the words, each one a tiny shard of ice driving into my skin as I stood in that sterile boardroom, the air thick with the scent of betrayal and cheap coffee. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it threatened to shatter the carefully constructed facade I'd spent years perfecting. They thought they had broken Evelyn. They were wrong. If you've ever been betrayed by family, subscribe and share your story. Let's build a community of survivors, united by our scars and strengthened by our resolve. Because family should lift you up, not tear you down. My name is Evelyn Shaw, and until recently, I was the unsung architect of Shaw Riverfront's meteoric rise. 40% of that warehouse empire, the high-margin projects, the innovative designs that revolutionized storage solutions, all my doing. Years I poured into that company, years of late nights, sacrificed weekends, and relentless dedication, building a legacy alongside my family, or so I thought. I envisioned a future, a shared triumph, a dynasty built on mutual respect and unwavering loyalty. My brother Thomas always seemed content with a supporting role. He lacked the innovative spark, the relentless drive that defined me, content to manage the day-to-day operations while I dreamed bigger, bolder, better. He was good at that, I'll give him that, and I genuinely believed our skill sets complemented each other, a perfect synergy driving the company forward. My parents, bless their hearts, always favored Thomas, the firstborn son, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. I accepted it, even understood it to some extent. I excelled in my field, my work spoke for itself, and deep down, I craved their validation but didn't need it. My achievements were my own reward. I was fine being the quiet achiever, the one who built the empire while Thomas basked in the glow of their approval. That morning started like any other. I arrived early, as usual, eager to finalize the Apex national contract, a deal I'd been meticulously crafting for months. It was a game changer, a massive expansion that would solidify Shaw Riverfront's position as an industry leader. I walked into the boardroom, expecting to present the final proposal to celebrate another victory with my family. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Thomas sat at the head of the table, flanked by my parents, their faces grim and unreadable. A lawyer I'd never seen before stood beside him, holding a stack of documents. The air crackled with a tension I couldn't ignore. "Evelyn," my father began, his voice strained, "we have something to discuss." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Thomas cleared his throat, a smugness creeping into his expression that I'd never witnessed before. He presented the documents, the fine print swimming before my eyes as I scanned the pages. A restructuring proposal, it declared, one that would see Thomas appointed as CEO, effective immediately. And me, I was being transitioned out of the company, my position deemed redundant. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the carefully constructed reality I'd inhabited for so long crumbling around me. I stared at them, my family, my blood, the people I had trusted implicitly, and realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't a restructuring, it was a coup. A calculated, cold-blooded betrayal orchestrated by the very people I loved. I remember my mother's eyes, usually soft and filled with pride, averted, unable to meet my gaze. My father, a man of supposed integrity, stammered justifications, claiming it was for the best, that Thomas was ready to lead. But it was Thomas's face that seared itself into my memory, the triumphant glint in his eyes, the subtle smirk playing on his lips as he watched me absorb the shock. "Evelyn," he said, his voice dripping with a condescension I'd never heard before, "it's time for a change. You've done well, but you're not a leader. You lack the vision, the decisiveness to take this company to the next level." The audacity of his words, the sheer hypocrisy of his pronouncements, momentarily robbed me of my voice. He, the man who had coasted on my coattails for years, was now lecturing me on leadership. The injustice of it all threatened to consume me, to unleash a torrent of fury that would shatter the boardroom windows and send their carefully constructed plans spiraling into chaos. But I held it back, I swallowed the bile rising in my throat, I forced myself to remain composed. Because in that moment, as they reveled in their victory, as they congratulated themselves on their brilliance, I made a decision. They thought they had ended me. They thought they had silenced my voice, erased my contributions, and relegated me to the sidelines. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The person I trusted most was one of them. The walk out of that boardroom felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Each step echoed in the sudden silence of my world. I clutched the severance agreement, a pathetic consolation prize for years of dedication, the paper cutting into my palm, a physical manifestation of the deeper wounds they had inflicted. My office, once a sanctuary of creativity and ambition, now felt tainted, a monument to my naivete. As I gathered my personal belongings, the framed photos of company milestones, the prototypes of groundbreaking designs, each item felt like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. My team, my loyal team, watched with a mixture of shock and heartbroken empathy, their faces a silent testament to the injustice unfolding. I offered them a weak smile, a hollow promise that everything would be all right, knowing full well that it wouldn't. The drive home was a blur, the familiar landscape transformed into an alien world. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating my thoughts, clouding my vision. I replayed the scene in my head, searching for clues, for signs I had missed, for any indication that this storm was brewing. But there was nothing, only the crushing realization that my family, the people I had trusted most, had been plotting my downfall all along. Sleep offered no respite. Nightmares plagued me, visions of Thomas gloating, my parents turning away, the company I had built crumbling into dust. I tossed and turned, my mind racing, consumed by a burning rage and a profound sense of loss. I woke up exhausted, the darkness under my eyes mirroring the hollowness in my heart. The days that followed were a living hell. I tried to reason with them, to appeal to their sense of fairness, to remind them of the years I had dedicated to the company. But my pleas fell on deaf ears. Thomas, emboldened by his newfound power, dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand, his eyes cold and devoid of emotion. My parents, once my staunchest supporters, echoed his sentiments, their voices laced with a forced conviction that betrayed their unease. They had made their decision, and nothing I could say would change their minds. The Apex National contract, the deal I had poured my heart and soul into, was now Thomas's victory to claim. He basked in the accolades, accepting the praise for innovations he didn't understand, for strategies he hadn't conceived. Watching him steal my legacy, rewrite my history, was a torment I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I consulted lawyers, explored my legal options, desperately searching for a loophole, a clause, anything that could salvage my position. But the documents were airtight, the restructuring carefully crafted to protect Thomas and my parents from any legal repercussions. I was trapped, powerless, a victim of their calculated treachery. The financial consequences were devastating. My severance package was a pittance compared to the value of my shares, shares they had conveniently devalued before forcing me out. I watched my savings dwindle, my financial security eroding with each passing day. The stress took its toll. I lost weight, my hair began to thin, and my once vibrant energy was replaced by annoying fatigue. My friends tried to offer support to distract me from the pain, but their words of encouragement felt hollow, their attempts at comfort falling short. They couldn't understand the depth of my betrayal, the agonizing realization that the people I loved most were the ones who had inflicted the deepest wounds. The sleepless nights continued, the weight of injustice crushing me. I found myself staring at the ceiling for hours, replaying the events, searching for answers, plotting my next move. They thought they had broken me, that I would simply fade away, defeated and forgot. They were wrong. The anger, the pain, the humiliation fueled a burning desire for retribution. I would not let them get away with this. I would not allow them to steal my legacy and destroy my life. I would fight back, not with anger or violence, but with cunning and precision. I would use their arrogance, their complacency against them. I would expose their lies, reveal their true nature, and reclaim what was rightfully mine. The plan began to take shape, an intricate web of strategies and countermoves, a carefully calculated path to revenge. I would play their game, but I would play it better. I would smile, I would act broken, but beneath the surface I would be plotting their downfall. They thought they were untouchable. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The following weeks bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of despair and simmering rage. My apartment, once a sanctuary filled with light and laughter, became a prison of my own making. I shut out the world, ignoring calls from friends, declining invitations, isolating myself in the darkness of my resentment. The reflection staring back at me from the mirror was a stranger, gaunt and hollow-eyed, a ghost of the woman I once was. I lost interest in everything, my passions, my hobbies. The things that once brought me joy now seemed meaningless, tainted by the bitterness of my betrayal. Food became a chore, sleep an elusive luxury. I existed in a state of perpetual numbness, a walking shadow consumed by the weight of my grief. One evening, I found myself standing on my balcony, staring out at the city lights, a million tiny sparks twinkling in the vast darkness. The wind whipped around me, carrying the faint scent of rain, the city's symphony a dull roar in the background. I leaned against the railing, the cold metal biting into my skin, the abyss of the city mirroring the emptiness within me. A wave of despair washed over me, so profound, so overwhelming that I felt like I was drowning. The thought flickered through my mind, a fleeting whisper of escape, a way to silence the pain, to end the torment. The edge of the balcony beckoned, a promise of oblivion, a release from the crushing weight of my reality. But as I stood there, teetering on the precipice, something stopped me. A flicker of defiance, a spark of resilience, a refusal to let them win. The image of Thomas's smug face flashed before my eyes, the triumphant glint in his eyes as he watched me fall. And in that moment, the despair began to recede, replaced by a surge of cold, hard anger. I would not give them the satisfaction. I would not let them break me. I would not let them erase me. I stumbled back from the railing, my breath ragged, my body trembling. The moment had passed, the darkness had retreated, leaving behind a residue of grim determination. I turned away from the city lights, away from the temptation of oblivion, and walked back into my apartment. I needed a plan. The first step was information. I needed to know everything about what they were doing at Shaw Riverfront. I needed to understand their strategies, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. I started small, reactivating dormant contacts within the company, casually inquiring about ongoing projects, subtly probing for any signs of trouble. Most were hesitant, fearful of jeopardizing their positions, but a few, loyal to me from years of shared struggles, offered cautious snippets of information. It was like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle, each fragment of data slowly revealing the bigger picture. Thomas, it turned out, was not the visionary leader he pretended to be. He was floundering, making rash decisions, alienating key clients, and surrounding himself with sycophants who reinforced his ego but offered no real expertise. The Apex national contract, the deal he had so eagerly claimed, was already showing signs of unraveling, plagued by delays, cost overruns, and a growing dissatisfaction from the client. My parents, blinded by their unwavering faith in Thomas, were oblivious to the impending disaster, unwilling to acknowledge the cracks forming in their carefully constructed facade. The more I learned, the more my resolve hardened. Their arrogance, their incompetence was creating opportunities, vulnerabilities that I could exploit. But I needed more. I needed concrete evidence, undeniable proof of their misdeeds. That's when I remembered Sarah. Sarah had been my executive assistant for years, my right hand, my confidant. She was fiercely loyal, incredibly resourceful, and possessed an uncanny ability to anticipate my needs. I had initially hesitated to contact her, not wanting to put her in a difficult position, but the need for information outweighed my concerns. I sent her a coded message, a seemingly innocuous email referencing a shared inside joke, a signal that I needed to talk. She responded within hours, her reply brief but reassuring. We met at a discreet coffee shop, a place far from the prying eyes of Shaw Riverfront. Sarah looked tired, her eyes shadowed with worry, but her loyalty was unwavering. Evelyn, I'm so sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What they did was wrong. I waved off her apology, focusing on the task at hand. I need your help, Sarah, I said, my voice low and urgent. I need information. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around the coffee shop before nodding slowly. What do you need to know? Over the next few weeks, Sarah became my eyes and ears inside Shaw Riverfront. She risked her job, her career, to feed me information, providing me with documents, emails, and recordings that painted a damning picture of Thomas's incompetence and my parents' complicity. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable proof of their betrayal, their mismanagement, and their lies. With each piece of information, my plan solidified, the path to revenge becoming clearer. I would not confront them directly, not yet. I would not give them the opportunity to spin their lies or manipulate the situation. Instead, I would gather my evidence, build my case, and expose them publicly in a way that would shatter their reputation and destroy their empire. The rage that had consumed me began to transform, morphing into a cold, calculating focus. I was no longer a victim, drowning in despair. I was a strategist, a planner, a force to be reckoned with. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I became a ghost in my own life, a phantom observing from the shadows as Thomas continued his reign of error. I smiled at company events, offered polite congratulations on his successes, all while meticulously documenting every misstep, every lie, every act of arrogance. My apartment transformed into a war room, a clandestine hub of information gathering and strategic planning. I invested in high-end surveillance equipment, miniature cameras disguised as everyday objects, hidden microphones capable of capturing conversations from across the room. I needed irrefutable evidence, recordings that would withstand legal scrutiny and expose their deception to the world. Sarah, bless her heart, became my inside operative, bravely navigating the treacherous terrain of Shaw Riverfront, feeding me a steady stream of intel. She'd leave encrypted files on a drop box, a virtual dead letter box, ensuring that there was no direct connection that could be traced back to either of us. There were close calls, moments when I thought our operation was about to be exposed. Once, Sarah accidentally left a sensitive document on her desk, only to retrieve it moments before Thomas walked into her office. The sound of the shredder whirring in the background was almost the soundtrack to my nervous breakdown that night. Another time, my apartment building's security system malfunctioned, triggering a building-wide evacuation. I had to scramble to conceal my surveillance equipment, stuffing cameras and microphones into drawers and cabinets, praying that no one would notice anything suspicious. Each near miss fueled my determination, sharpening my focus, reminding me of the stakes involved. I delved into forensic accounting, meticulously analyzing Shaw Riverfront's financial records, uncovering a pattern of questionable transactions, inflated expenses, and hidden accounts. Thomas was siphoning money from the company, using it to fund his lavish lifestyle, his extravagant parties, his secret indulgences. My parents, either willfully ignorant or actively complicit, were turning a blind eye to his malfeasance, their loyalty to their son overriding their responsibility to the company and its shareholders. I consulted with a team of lawyers, experts in corporate fraud and defamation, carefully outlining my case, ensuring that my evidence was admissible in court. We discussed the legal ramifications of my actions, the potential for lawsuits, the risk of retaliation, but I was undeterred. I was prepared to face any consequences, to endure any hardship to bring them to justice. The plan required patience, precision, and nerves of steel. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes, to reveal my hand prematurely. I had to wait for the right moment, the opportune time to strike. That moment came sooner than I expected. The Apex National contract, the cornerstone of Thomas's supposed success, was on the verge of collapse. The client, frustrated by delays, cost overruns, and a lack of communication, was threatening to pull out of the deal, a move that would send Shaw Riverfront spiraling into financial ruin. Thomas, desperate to salvage the situation, resorted to increasingly desperate measures, making false promises, concealing critical information, and engaging in outright deception. I knew this was my chance. I had been gathering evidence of his misconduct for months, meticulously documenting every lie, every act of mismanagement, every instance of fraud. Now, it was time to unleash that information on the world. I contacted a journalist, a respected investigative reporter with a reputation for uncovering corporate corruption. I provided her with a carefully curated selection of documents, emails, and recordings, enough to pique her interest and launch her own investigation. I remained anonymous, communicating with her through encrypted channels, shielding my identity from Thomas and my parents. I knew that once the story broke, all hell would break loose. But I was ready. I had anticipated their reactions, their defenses, their attempts to discredit me. I had prepared for every eventuality. I spent weeks crafting a detailed statement, outlining my accusations, presenting my evidence, and explaining my motivations. I made sure it was airtight, factually accurate, and emotionally compelling. I wanted the world to understand the injustice I had suffered, the betrayal I had endured, and the reasons why I was fighting back. The final step was to secure my own safety. I knew that Thomas and my parents would be furious, desperate to silence me, to protect their reputation and their fortune. I hired a security firm to provide me with round-the-clock protection, installing security cameras and alarms throughout my apartment. I changed my phone number, created a new email address, and went into hiding, severing all ties with my former life. I was a fugitive, a whistleblower, a woman on a mission. The day the story broke, I watched from my secure location as the world erupted. The journalist's exposé was devastating, a meticulously researched and damning indictment of Thomas's incompetence, my parents' complicity, and the culture of corruption that had permeated Shaw Riverfront. The stock price plummeted, clients severed ties, and investors demanded answers. Thomas and my parents were caught completely off guard, their carefully constructed facade crumbling before their eyes. The cameras caught everything. Thomas, packing like a caged animal, screaming at his assistant, the spittle flying from his mouth as he blamed everyone but himself. My parents, faces etched with panic, desperately trying to contain the damage, issuing hollow reassurances to angry investors. But the real gold, the smoking gun, came from a seemingly innocuous conversation captured by a hidden microphone in Thomas's office. He was on the phone with a shadowy figure, discussing the Apex National contract. He admitted that the delays were deliberate, engineered to inflate costs and justify further investment. He spoke of kickbacks, offshore accounts, and a complex web of financial trickery designed to enrich himself and his cronies. The recording was crystal clear, the evidence undeniable. This wasn't just incompetence, it was outright fraud, a criminal conspiracy that could land them all in prison. I felt a surge of vindication, a cold, hard satisfaction that washed over me like a wave. They had thought they were so clever, so untouchable, they were wrong. I had them, and I was about to bring their entire house of cards crashing down. The journalist was ecstatic. The new evidence was explosive, a game changer that would elevate the story from a corporate scandal to a full-blown criminal investigation. She promised to include the new details in her follow-up article, amplifying the impact and ensuring that no one could ignore the truth. I knew that this was it, the point of no return. Once the second article was published, there would be no going back. Thomas and my parents would be exposed, their reputations ruined, their freedom at risk. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the storm that was about to break. It was time to set the trap. I crafted an anonymous email designed to lure Thomas into a false sense of security. I posed as a disgruntled employee, someone who had been overlooked and underappreciated, someone who was willing to help him bury the scandal in exchange for a hefty sum of money. I hinted at having access to sensitive information, documents that could exonerate him and implicate others. I knew that his desperation would cloud his judgment, that his arrogance would convince him that he could outsmart me. The bait worked perfectly. Thomas responded within hours, his tone cautious but eager. He proposed a meeting, a clandestine rendezvous at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. I hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks. It was a dangerous game, meeting him in person, but I knew that it was necessary. I needed to see the fear in his eyes to witness his downfall firsthand. I agreed to the meeting, stipulating a set of conditions designed to ensure my safety. He was to come alone, unarmed, and without any surveillance. He was to bring the money, a suitcase filled with unmarked bills, and he was to follow my instructions to the letter. I spent the next few days preparing for the encounter, meticulously planning every detail, anticipating every possible scenario. I transformed the warehouse into a stage, a carefully orchestrated set designed to expose his guilt and capture his confession on tape. I installed hidden cameras and microphones throughout the building, ensuring that every word, every gesture would be recorded for posterity. I contacted the authorities, providing them with the details of the meeting, the evidence of Thomas's crimes, and my plan to lure him into a trap. They agreed to monitor the situation from a distance, ready to intervene if things went south. but I insisted on being the one to confront him, to be the one to deliver the final blow. The night of the meeting arrived, cloaked in a thick fog that hung heavy in the air. I drove to the warehouse, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands gripping the steering wheel. As I approached the building, I saw Thomas's car parked outside, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of everything that had led me to this moment. The betrayal, the humiliation, the injustice. It was time to end this. I walked into the warehouse, the silence broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Thomas was waiting for me, his face pale and drawn, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He held a suitcase in his hand, the weight of his desperation palpable in the air. "You got the information?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, a cold, hard smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "Oh, I have more than just information, Thomas," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "I have the truth." And then I revealed myself. The color drained from Thomas's face. His eyes widened, his jaw slackened, and the suitcase slipped from his grasp, thudding onto the concrete floor. "Evelyn, what? What is this?" he stammered, his voice laced with disbelief and dawning horror. "This," I said, gesturing around the warehouse, "is your reckoning, Thomas. This is where your lies end." I pulled out a remote control, pressing a button. Suddenly, the warehouse was flooded with light as the hidden cameras whirred to life. A large screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a live feed of the room, capturing every angle, every expression. "Smile, Thomas," I said, my voice echoing through the space. "You're on candid camera." He lunged at me, his face contorted with rage, his hands outstretched. But before he could reach me, two figures emerged from the shadows, intercepting him with practiced efficiency. They were the security personnel I had hired, their expressions impassive, their movements precise. They restrained him, pinning his arms behind his back, his struggles futile. "Let me go," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "You can't do this. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you've got." "Sue me," I scoffed. "After what you've done, after what you've stolen. After the way you betrayed me in this company, you're the one who's going to need a lawyer, Thomas. A very good one." I walked towards him, my eyes fixed on his, my voice low and menacing. "Remember the Apex national contract?" I asked. "Remember all those delays and cost overruns? Remember the kickbacks in the offshore accounts?" His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. He was trapped, cornered, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. "I don't know what you're talking about," he mumbled, his voice trembling. "Liar," I spat. I pressed another button on the remote control, and the screen flickered, displaying a series of documents, emails, and recordings, each one a piece of damning evidence that exposed his crimes. The final exhibit was the recording of his phone conversation, the one where he confessed to the fraud, the one where he implicated himself in a criminal conspiracy. As his own voice filled the warehouse, Thomas's face crumbled. His eyes widened in disbelief, his mouth opened in a silent scream, and his body went limp. He knew he was finished. The authorities arrived moments later, sirens wailing, lights flashing. They took Thomas into custody, reading him his rights as they led him away in handcuffs. My parents arrived shortly after, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and despair. They tried to reason with me, to plead with me to drop the charges, to salvage what was left of their reputation. But I refused to listen. Their betrayal was too deep, their complicity too egregious. They had chosen their son over me, over the company, over the truth. Now they would face the consequences. The fallout was swift and devastating. Shaw Riverfront was placed under investigation, its assets frozen, its future uncertain. My parents were forced to resign from their positions, their careers in ruins, their legacy tarnished. Thomas was charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, facing a lengthy prison sentence. The story dominated the news cycle for weeks, a cautionary tale of corporate greed, family betrayal, and the power of revenge. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over me. They had lost everything, their money, their power, their reputation, their freedom. They had underestimated me, mistaking my silence for weakness. Now they knew the truth. In the weeks that followed, I received countless messages of support, gratitude, and admiration. Former employees of Shaw Riverfront thanked me for exposing the truth, for holding those accountable who had caused them so much harm. Shareholders praised me for saving the company from financial ruin, for restoring its integrity. The journalist who had broken the story offered me a book deal, a chance to tell my story in my own words. I declined. I wasn't interested in fame or fortune. I only wanted justice. I quietly sold my shares in Shaw Riverfront, donating the proceeds to charities that supported victims of corporate fraud. I wanted nothing more to do with the company, with my family, with that chapter of my life. I changed my name, moved to a new city, and started over. I built a new life for myself, one based on honesty, integrity, and purpose. I found peace, happiness, and fulfillment. I often think about Thomas and my parents, about the choices they made, the path they took. I wonder if they regret their actions, if they understand the consequences of their betrayal. I doubt it. Some people are simply incapable of seeing beyond their own greed, their own ambition, their own self-interest. But I don't dwell on them. I don't waste my time on anger or resentment. I have moved on. I have healed. I have found my own path. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. It's a way to reclaim your power, to stand up for yourself, to fight back against injustice. It's not about inflicting pain, it's about restoring balance. It's about sending a message that you will not be silenced, that you will not be ignored, that you will not be a victim. They lost everything. I just smiled. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.